the laws can change at their rhythm, things can pass, they can get repealed, but the culture shift is so much more permanent. Reproductive justice is a framework that was born of Black women, Black feminists, and it is the ability to have or not have kids and to raise them in safe communities. I left behind the world of single issue organizing because, we don't live single issue lives. I'm not just a queer person.
Sabrosura pa' ti que.
Hello, everyone. Yo soy Pam, your host of Café con Pam, the bilingual podcast exploring stories that inspire Latine and people of the global majority to embrace their voice, challenge calladita culture, and step into their power. We celebrate those who break barriers, change lives, and make the world a better place. El día de hoy tenemos una conversación with Charo Valero. Charo was born and raised in Panama City, Panama, and she's called Miami her home for the past 18 years, where she currently resides with her wife and their geriatric fur babies. Así se dice, geriatric. Pues están viejitos, pues. Charo is primarily an activist and organizer, prioritizing statewide policies that impact reproductive justice while building power and solidarity in communities of color. Charo is currently the Florida State Manager for the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice. Charo's a Virgo who loves traveling, Excel, like the spreadsheets, and a good laugh. Y bueno, listeners, yo me divertí mucho, la verdad, con esta conversación because Charo is really cool. And also, we just kind of like, at the end, she told me, like, I've done a lot of press, but this was a very different type of interview because it was very personal. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to Café con Pam. That's what we do here. And so while we asked a lot of questions related to her story, we also explored why reproductive justice is important. Of course, we dropped some data for your listening pressure, and fue una plática muy buena, la verdad. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Y bueno, sin más, aquí está mi conversación with Charo Valero. Charo, welcome to Café con Pam.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Salud.
Salud. Yo tengo agua. It's too late for me. It's kind of late for you, no?
It's matcha.
Ah, bueno. Mm-hmm. We'll have a coffee break later and we'll talk about your drink. But the first question we always ask is, what is your heritage?
Okay. Yo soy panameña, born and raised in Panama. I've been in Miami, Florida for the past 18 years, since 2006. Pero ya, panameña. Bueno, mi papá es de España, pero llegó a Panamá a los 5 años y panameño,
Claro.
¿verdad? Pero soy panameña, yeah.
So, Charo, how did you get into the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, right? Las vueltas que da la vida, right?
Claro.
So when I first moved to this country in my early 20s, I have an MBA in finance. My background is accounting. And I did accounting for a little bit. And in accounting, you really have an up close and really personal experience with capitalism. I was just, working for somebody that had a lot of resources and would get around his property in a Segway and had a tennis court and a pool and would fight his employees for 50 cent an hour raises,
Right.
Um, and I just didn't like that, right? So there was a lot of things happening at the same time, and I had just become a citizen, so I had recently, as a citizen, you want to become civically engaged, you want to understand the political systems. There's a lot of learning and unlearning because we come from countries that also things don't necessarily work in the same way. In Panama, it's not these folks believe this, these folks believe that. It's who sells it to you best, what are they promising the people, right? So
Mm,
I also came out. It happened around the time when I was coming out, so there was a lot happening.
yeah.
Yeah, through volunteering, actually, at for lesbian parties, LGBTQ parties, I discovered political advocacy and specifically local LGBTQ organizing. And then I became politicized. And then I left behind the world of single issue organizing because, we don't live single issue lives. I'm not just a queer person,
Yeah.
right? I'm an immigrant, I'm a woman. And then as a part of my journey, I came across reproductive justice, and that's where I found Latina Institute. And I feel like I really found like reproductive justice as a framework and as a lens to understand the world and do advocacy was just a beautiful thing to come across, and to learn. Birthed by Black women. So yeah, it was a long, interesting journey.
Totally.
But it really was like rooted in curiosity and volunteering and trying to understand my community, and then just becoming aware of, like the isms and schisms, the messiness of what the injustice is, and now I can do this work for a living, which is a blessing, really.
Totally. So let's bring it back a little bit. Why accounting?
Because my dad's a small business owner.
Oh, so you kind of like,
That's what you know.
yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
did you start doing the books before you were trained?
That's such a sweet question. I actually have memories of my aunt when I was like 13, teaching me, the big general ledger books that they had
Yeah,
back in the day.
like the actual books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And when you would print stuff out with like the printer that would make a lot of noise that had holes on the ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. And they would have me count the money and put it in envelopes. Like my dad, I don't know if it was intentionally or just let's give this girl something to do. But very early on, I discovered that like I don't know what it is, right? That appreciation, that respect for money, but also like just quantifying things and making sense of the world through that lens, which a
Mm,
lot of people I learned don't really.
no.
Yeah,
I mean, especially in Latinos, we don't have the money conversation. It doesn't happen,
right, right,
which is one big issue why many things happen because
right.
we don't have a hold of what it is to own things.
Yeah, not my dad. Not my dad. Very proud of him for like my dad is a good capitalist. He didn't grow up a good capitalist, but he learned the game, and he, you know, in the sense that he's a good capitalist, like he knows, you know, he didn't come from a lot. He's been working since he was 13, and it's just fascinating when people are like, I need to figure this out if I don't want to, because it's working smart.
Yes, for sure. So you come to the US when you're 20 ish?
Yeah, 23.
23. And
Yeah.
at that point, you had gone to school or did you go to school here?
I went to school in Panama. But there was a brief moment in in my elementary when I lived in Miami for a couple years. It's when the invasion in Panama happened and the banks closed, and my dad got scared, and then we lived in Miami for a little bit, and then we went back.
Wow.
Yeah, super interesting, all over the place.
I know. And so, how was it for you to come here at 20 or 20 something? You know, like
Yeah,
it's different from the people that come here when they're 6.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's. I still feel I've been here for 18 years, and I still feel that I'm realizing more and more how there is a culture shock, even when you come from Latin America or a place like Panama that's very Americanized and very developed and very modern, or whatever. But when I first got here, I mean, I think what the hardest thing for me was the visibility of queer folks,
Mm,
right? So when I got here, queerness wasn't really an option. It wasn't something I was denying to myself. It was just something I'd never seen, right? And in not seeing something, you don't really consider it an option for yourself, right? So it really took me all of like 2 months to like come out and realize. And so I think that was the biggest shocker. Also, like living alone and not with your big family, and not having the Friday night dinners and
right.
the Sunday night this, and um but it was really I admire, and I admire and deeply respect like the entrepreneurial spirit of the immigrant. I think there's
Mhm.
something bold and beautiful about folks who just pick up and leave their home and take a risk in a new place, in a new country, in different language, and just se la rifan, And I think there's just something so bold and beautiful.
Yeah,
about that. I feel like there's like a fearlessness to that that I just, and I pay tribute. It wasn't my doing. My parents are the OG immigrants. They're the ones that took the first step, right? And then I followed and did, But I think it's truly beautiful being an immigrant.
totally. And how interesting to see the dichotomy of how it's now it is in this at the time of recording, being an immigrant is vilified and, you know,
Yeah. What's your background?
like Mexico.
Yeah, and I wish like I've been to Mexico, and Mexico is just wow, like so the food, the history, the colors, the people, and I just wish that if si los gringos viajaran más,
Claro,
if they just knew the depth and just if they could understand the depth, they wouldn't see us in these ways, right? Like I just
correct.
it says more about them than it does about folks who are migrating, to be honest. Yeah.
100%. 100. I mean, I see it now with all the gringos in La Ciudad de Mexico that are like, "Oh, Mexico City's great." And I'm like, "Yeah, because now you see it. Now you see it."
Right. 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 Right.
Come on. Um so back to your story before we go into into a rant, cuz I'm from Mexico City. And so seeing like Mexico City trending and like gentrifying it and like seeing my friends being displaced because they can't afford rent because it's been so, it's like, sure, go visit, leave your dollars there, but don't take over. It's a new
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
colonization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you make it to the US, you come out. How does your family take it?
It's complicated, right? At first, I thought when I first told my mom, I thought she was taking it quite nicely. I was like, "Oh, this is going smooth." And then the next day, I had an appointment with a therapist.
Oh,
It's incredible. Therapists save lives, right? Because that therapist, like, he told me, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with you." And I don't think my mom was expecting that. I don't think she wasn't trying to get me into like, what is it?
conversion therapy?
Yeah, she wasn't trying to do that, right? But because I think if she would have done better research, and my mom's not like that, right? Um, but he told me there's nothing wrong with you. My son is gay. I had a hard time understanding it and accepting it. Tell your mother that if she needs somebody to talk to, she can come here. So I just remember that moment, and I think that just made all the difference, right?
Mm.
My dad, like a good Latino dad and man, my mom says, la procesión es por dentro. So I never really understood my dad's process because I don't think he articulated it to anybody.
And it's hard. They're not socialized to share
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
feelings.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But what I do think is beautiful about Latina families and like my parents, specifically my parents' love of me, is that um, it was hard. I remember there was a point where I came out, and like it was just a central argument or point, and my mom didn't understand. And I remember at this point, I had been here for a little bit, and you learn like, toxicity, that's a toxic relationship. And I got to break up with my parents. And I go to my mom and I'm like, Mom, this relationship is toxic. I can't do this. And she's like, Yo soy tu mamá. Yo te voy a seguir llamando. Si tú no me quieres contestar, allá en tu conciencia. So like she never, like it was just something we had to sit with. And my mom is, I mean, it's been a long time, right?
Yeah.
And I've been with my wife at this point for 12 years, and she had, you know, 6 to 8 years before that to accept it. And she was comfortable with, with my gay friends. It was just a little complicated when her daughter came out.
Right.
But she's biggest advocate, like we go to Panama Pride. She goes to
Mm.
drag shows, and when we went to Panama Pride last year, she bumps into a friend, and oh, this is my daughter and her wife. And it's like, oh, how was it when your daughter came out? And she was like, great. And I was like,
Ya no se acuerda.
mom, tampoco así. She's like, ay, no sea así. Eso no es verdad. And I'm like, okay, fine. But it was beautiful. It was beautiful because it's a testament to that love, to that maternal love. And like that, like, I think when I told her, you don't have to understand, you just have to accept. I think that was one of the
Mm.
things that really, so I love that. I love the story of my parents and I, because it's a testament to like a really
Hmm.
deep unconditional love, and I feel very fortunate to have that kind of love and those kind of parents, because I know that's not everybody's experience.
Totally. And I love that you mentioned the Latina family dynamic, how in the US, American like culture is like set the boundaries and like you said, break up with your parents, don't talk to them ever again. Aquí no pasa. Like there's no way that's gonna happen. And so I love that part of the story because I think it's critical. And many times we see all of these like whatever influencers or people talking about like you have to, and I often talk about the boundary with a clear understanding that there's layers to boundaries.
Right.
You know, it's not that you're going to stop talking to your parents forever, is that maybe you just sit less at the sala in the fiesta.
And there's layers to trauma and
Yeah,
hurt that that families can cause. I mean, I've done the whole therapy thing. I've had a phenomenal upbringing. You know, my parents were always present. There was never any, I was never rejected or never felt loved. Like I went to a good school. My grandparents were lovely. Like I was, yeah, I mean, I understand, and I think that some people do have to set really firm, clear boundaries. But lo mío is a very vanilla situation.
for sure. Like not all stories are created equal because there's a lot of background.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and and I think sometimes we'll hear statements of like set the boundary and it's like, well, but I don't know if I can do it that way. Like it's
yeah,
let
yeah,
me
yeah.
set the boundary my way or my mom won't let me set the boundary.
For real, for real.
So I also love that you went to look for community. So this involvement of how could I find people, and that's like you said, you can't be it if you can't see it. And so finding the groups and the acceptance, and that's kind of like how you slowly got involved into the activist world. Was there ever a kind of like, oh, I'm leaving my career behind type thing? Or were you just so into it that you were like, no importa?
I was looking for a shift because I mean, back to the capitalism thing. I was like, I can't do this. This feels dirty, and
Mm,
I didn't necessarily know that I would land in political advocacy and nonprofit, which is like something that as a career doesn't even exist in some of our countries, right? Like for example, advocacy. People think I'm a lawyer in Panama. I'm like, no, 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 abogacía, right? Like I organize. Like there's so many layers. But I also went back to school because when I was coming out, faith was a tool that I felt was like just shaming me, and I went back to school for religious studies.
wow.
Yeah, I just felt like I had to transition out. Like, what do you do if you feel like you're stuck in a certain career
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know how to get out? So some at that age, at that point, I was like, I just need to go back to school, right? And like explore other things. And that led me to traveling and to like just doing more things. And it was just a point in my life that like kind of just, I mean, that's what happens, right? I guess in your mid 20s, right?
Find yourself. Y pensando en las familias latinoamericanas, we're very much like la carrera, ¿no? Like there's
Yeah,
this, but you said you grew up with an entrepreneur dad. I don't know if it was both.
yeah.
And sometimes I grew up with a business owner mom. And so my grandpa on my dad's side was like, no, you want the secure path and like the career and the pension. And did you have that also?
I think that I knew that my dad is a business owner. My mom, I mean, my parents are still together and they have a beautiful relationship. I mean, lo que es de mi papá es de mi mamá, right? So
Claro.
like, but my mom also had her career in marketing. So she was also,
Nice.
a professional. And I think I always knew that my dad wanted us to do business, but I think my parents' dreams for their kids were like, I want them to be American citizens. I want them, like those kinds of dreams. And I think that because my dad worked so early and he like was like built out the family business and had so much, I think that he always tried to not do that to us. So he
Mm,
was always like, I don't want to. I don't want you, I want you to do what you want to do. So again, very lucky to have the parents that I have, Yeah.
For sure.
So I never felt that kind of pressure.
I love that.
I felt like they'd always have my back. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so liberating
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
freeing. So you go and you find yourself, you get into all these things, you study religion and
Right.
find the LGBT. I don't think it was LGBTQIA plus then.
Well, I was specifically focused on like the women spaces. So it was
Okay.
LBTQ.
Okay. And that's how you start finding like we can do something besides crunching numbers, I guess.
Well, through the community, I found social and partying and fun,
Mm,
and then it was after that being like, okay, like just through community becoming politicized. But I found community as like a social outlet.
first.
Yeah. First, it was purely social. And then it was like there was overlap with like me becoming a citizen, having to take that citizenship test, like sitting in the immigration thing, waving the little flag because you just passed the test and you're set, like it was
Mhm.
it was a lot of different things happening. And then coming to understand the political system, right?
For sure.
Which is why political education is just so important to me, because there's a lot of learning and unlearning, but then people are born in this country and they don't have to take a
I have no idea.
citizenship test. No idea. No idea.
We were laughing because my mom was talking about like I can tell you who the fourth president of the United States is, and I'm like, I think a lot of people can't do that. She's like, I studied the capitals of the states when I took my citizenship test and like the rivers and like all these like random facts about the US. And I'm like, yeah,
It's a lot of pressure for
yeah.
these simple questions that then you're like, that's
And
it?
they ask you 3 questions.
You made me study all that for this?
Yes.
They
I know.
really make you work for it.
They do. I mean, which is I think part of the ignorance of this country is that I often fight people with when they for me my cause is immigration because I have a family separation story and anytime I hear someone that's like you need to do it the right way, I'm like, "Oh, let's sit down.
Right. Right.
Please tell me what you know about what the right way means."
Yeah.
I waited
Yeah.
almost 15 years to see my brother because we did it the right way. Tell me what you know. And they don't know because there's no education about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just all plotting and hearing from sources that are not credible.
Yeah. The right way. What does that even mean? Anyway, yeah, I don't, yeah.
Right. Define that. Let's define that. So, how did you find or figure that it was reproductive justice, that it was your thing?
Um, I was doing LGBTQ organizing, and then I became disillusioned because I was like, sure, this person is gay or supports the gays, but they're literally anti-abortion, they're anti-immigrant, they're anti-black. Like, what do you mean we're canvassing for them? What do you mean we're just not uplifting this whole part of them? Uh, and then I stumbled across Latina Institute, and it was, I mean, in Latina Institute that I really learned and understood reproductive justice as a framework, as a way to see the world, and learned about, you know its grounding in Black feminism, and how inherently anti-racist reproductive justice is. And I just feel like I'm like, oh my God, everybody should, the gospel of reproductive justice.
For sure. So, let's take a quick coffee break and then we'll come back and talk about what it means because I'm sure people don't know.
Dale.
Sabrosura pa' ti que.
Charo, do you drink coffee?
I did, and I've cut back because I had like a mild allergy.
To coffee?
No, to some weird allergy to nickel, or I don't. It's just like the most. It's an obscure allergy that then disappeared. So I think it was actually stress.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm really loving matcha these days.
Much is great.
Yeah.
Do you make it at home?
Well, I mean, by make, you mean like put the little powder and put the milk and
Right.
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I make it at home.
Is that your beverage of choice every day?
I think so. I'll do different things. Like I have this golden milk, which is like turmeric and all
Nice.
these things. I'll have tea. I think I'm just, yeah, but mostly water.
Okay.
So I think my beverage of choice, I think I'm open to, I don't have a beverage of choice.
You
I
don't
don't
have a
think I have a
morning
beverage.
ritual,
No.
like it's whatever you feel?
Yeah, I think my morning ritual is more like chia seeds and yogurt,
Oh,
like
okay.
it's not a beverage per se.
And you leave them overnight?
Yes, but if it's last minute, you could do it like 15, 20 minutes before.
And you still get the like the jelly
Yes,
thing.
the pudding, yeah, it really is the best thing.
Water or like yogurt?
Almond milk, and then I mix it with yogurt,
Mm,
and then I put like kiwi and berries, and yeah,
fun.
yeah, it's fun, yeah,
I mean,
so fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
My beverage of choice nowadays is cacao, actually.
Oh,
I've been getting a lot into cacao, and I've talked about it in the podcast, so I'm not going to bore listeners. I have heard this story multiple times, but um, I had an issue with my heart 2 years ago where I almost died.
oh my goodness.
And then I started getting into cacao because, like, it's a very spiritual thing that it called me, but cacao has theobromine, and theobromine is a really heart opening compound. And I have this theory in my head that cacao, mother cacao, called me because it wanted to work with my heart.
Wow,
And my heart nearly killed me because I didn't listen when I was supposed to. I don't know. You know,
that's beautiful.
stories we tell ourselves. So, yeah. So this morning I had some cacao with lavender,
Ooh,
actually, and some lion's mane. And,
okay,
I take a lot of things for my brain so I
yeah,
can brain.
we're at that
Um,
age.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
we're like
so,
now it's like you're just talking to your friends about what supplements they're taking and
yes.
what are they, how far along their perimenopause journey are they?
Yes. Yes. I know. Every conversation I've had this week with women, I'm like, I think it's hormones. And they're like, you know what? Probably right.
But it's always hormones.
It's always hormones. The thing is that women are not studied.
Yeah,
Women haven't been studied until the last 10 years,
yeah.
if at all, in clinical studies, which is like, have you read Invisible Women?
No,
Oh, it's such a great book. Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolyn Criado Perez.
nice, cool. I'll add it to the list.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very data, like, heady book, but it's so good.
I can't get free. I can't just read for fun
I
anymore,
know.
and that's what I'm trying to do. But I just like feel so drawn to, I don't know, right? Like data,
Yes.
factual things, things that are informing the ways. But I need to read for fun. Even the stuff I'm trying to read for fun are a little more dystopic, and I'm like, Chado,
Right.
you need to loosen up.
I know. I know. I just shared a post earlier that I was like, I want to be a bookworm girly, but the way my ADHD is set up is not possible. So we're gonna keep reading data for now. Okay, let's get back to the show. Let's talk about something we all deserve: financial empowerment. Whether you're tackling debt, planning for retirement, or starting that dream business, navigating your finances can feel overwhelming. But it doesn't have to be, thanks to Savvy Ladies. Savvy Ladies is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women like you take control of your financial future. They offer free resources, webinars, and my favorite, a free financial helpline where you can connect one on one with trusted financial experts. And yes, it's completely free. Whether you're just starting your financial journey or need guidance on a specific challenge, Savvy Ladies is here to provide quality and trusted advice you can count on. So why wait? Visit savvyladies.org today and connect with the financial helpline to get the personalized support you deserve. Your journey to financial independence starts here. That is savvyladies.org. Your path to financial freedom can start today. So, you get into reproductive justice. Tell us, how would you define reproductive justice and why is it important?
Yeah. So reproductive justice is a framework that was born of Black women, Black feminists, and it is the ability to have or not have kids and to raise them in safe communities. Right. It's not just reproductive rights. Is can I access contraceptives? Can I access abortion? This is beyond that, right? And the work that we do specifically at Latina Institute is at the intersection with immigrant women's rights, right? So like it's not just about being able to have kids or not have them,
Mm,
right? But like when you were talking about family separation, right? Like that's not reproductive justice, right? Like it's also about being able to raise healthy families and thriving communities and safe communities. It's everything, right? But of course, it's rooted in Black feminism, right?
yeah.
Don't live single issue lives, right? This isn't. I'm just not one dimensional. Um, Many people want to have kids, but make the decision not to or can't because of maternal mortality or economics or so many different things. So yeah.
And tell us what your role is at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice. It's a name.
Well, I'm
Is there
the,
an
yeah,
acronym for
right, it's quite an in Latina Institute.
it? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I am the Florida state manager. Before I managed the state team, I was the lobbyist for 6 legislative sessions in Florida, but that
Wow.
was last time was 2022. So it's been a while since, I mean, lobbying and state capitals are a place, are fascinating.
Yeah.
And I was in the belly of the beast in the ivory tower.
How was that?
It was I mean, I would wear my little bow tie and my cute little men's shoes and my little outfits. I felt like just by being me and being in there and that,
That was resistance.
yeah, I felt just being there was enough. But it progressively got worse. Like the anti-immigrant attacks, the anti-abortion attacks, the extreme supermajority, like
Yeah.
just the attacks on folks wanting to resist at the Capitol. It's doing. Somebody who I consider a mentor said, "If you like sausage or the law, you should watch how neither is made."
Ooh.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's always stuck with me because it's so true,
Yes. Oh, yes.
right?
I'm like visualizing it all. Yes. Ooh. So let's talk a little bit about some data because I like data. So when it comes to the state abortion bans that threaten over 6 million Latinas, 6.7 million Latinas, is the largest group of women of color living under bans. And 43% of all Latinas ages 15 to 49 live in the 26 states that have banned or are likely to ban abortion. And they represent the largest group of women of color impacted by current or likely state bans. Why is this important? Why should people consider this?
Again, right? Multiple layers, right? We have multiple layers. So you're talking about, right? Latinidad is fascinating, right? Because Latine folks are not any one race, any one ethnicity, any one religion, any one immigration status, any one anything, right?
Yes.
So when you're talking about race, you're talking about literally institutionalized racism and anti-blackness impacts health outcomes, and Florida is one of the states with the worst maternal mortality rates in this country. When you're talking about immigration status, you're talking about, you know, whether it's language, you can't navigate a system because you can't understand the system, whether it's documentation, if you are undocumented, you literally do not have access. You cannot access some systems of support. If you're a new immigrant, sometimes you don't know what you can and cannot access. If you are lower income, what kind of job do you have? Do you have the kind of job where you can afford to take time off? Do you have a lot of the people that seek abortion care are already mothers.
Hmm.
Um, I think about, like, when you think about intersections in Florida specifically, Florida is one of the states where you cannot, if you're undocumented, you can't have a driver's license, right? And if you don't have a driver's license, driving without a driver's license is criminalized, but also, like, any getting pulled over for any one thing can be a chance or a, 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 a risk of deportation. So you have people, when I go to the store, when I go drop my kids off at work, at school, when I go to work, when I'm going to an appointment, a doctor's appointment, you have to make that decision, especially in these days, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
there's so many concerns. Like, am I going to get pulled over? They're going to realize I don't have a license. What does that tell them? Right. So there's lots of different layers as to why Latina folks experience so many barriers, right?
And what is work that the Latina Institute is doing to support that, which is a lot.
Yeah. So I see it as like three different. We have like three different approaches. So organizing, so like deep community organizing, education, making sure there are people that we're actually building a movement for reproductive justice. What is that? How do we achieve that? Political education is a key part of that. Um, Leadership development of folks. Obviously, you can't do any of that without connecting folks to research to resources. We're an advocacy org, so we're not a service provider, but we have access to folks who know how to access resources. Right now, a lot is know your rights. So making sure that folks know their rights so they're not vulnerable to, you know, the fuckery that is happening. So there's like the organizing piece, like the deep organizing work and community building. Then there's the advocacy work, like the political, like being a catalyst for political change. So like that looks like whether it's in the school board or the, you know, your county government or your state capital or in DC, right? Being in the places where the sausage is made, right? Being in the
Yeah.
places where laws are passed and making sure that, you know, odds are, you know, all when you're in politics, you know that this bill is already fast tracked to pass, but I am not sitting this out. I am going to make sure that we're represented and that we're resisting and that we're visible. And then the third piece, which is my favorite, my favorite thing about this work is the culture shift work, is what are the deep conversations that we have with people, and it's voters at the door, it's your mom, it's your cousins, it's your neighbor, it's what, and then also prompting conversations in other people. Like, you've been canvassing and you had a deep conversation with somebody around abortion, you turn around, you keep walking, and you hear the neighbor being like, de que era eso, and they're talking amongst
Mm.
themselves, right? And specifically, I think those conversations being around, there's a lot of in English and Spanish. My favorite my favorite is Spanish because there's so much missing in Spanish. There's also much mis and disinformation in Spanish that the really deep culture shift work that reduces stigma around abortion access, that lets folks know their rights, but also clarify what is happening, like being a trusted messenger in our community. And you know that requires a lot of going out in our communities, a lot of education, a lot of media. Um, but it truly is one of my favorite things about the work because it's so deep. Because the laws can change at their rhythm, things can pass, they can get repealed, but the culture shift is so much more permanent and so much more impactful and long term.
Mm.
And it's so beautiful too. Like, I feel like when you know, I feel like as a daughter, I've just taken my parents on so many different journeys. Like, they have this queer radical feminist daughter that got married to a woman and doesn't want to have kids and is super independent, and I think they've had to reconcile all that. And
Yes.
pro abortion, like pro black, pro immigrant, pro, like yes, and they just keep up. They've kept up, especially my mom. So I think it's a testament to that love, to like being in struggle with people and like meeting them where they're at, and then also like, and I'm not saying like I'm not the teacher here. Yo no soy la que más sabe. You know,
Mm.
I've grown and learned too, and you become better, and then you hear, when I hear my mom talking about abortion access, and I'm just like, yes, mom, right? Like, yeah, yeah. So I'm deeply committed to the culture shift work. I feel like that's where it's at.
I agree, and I think we have a lot of opportunity because there's so many generations alive now, and Gen Z and millennials are such influences into the older generations that are still here. And so I also see my mom had conversations sometimes, and I'm like, está oyendo, está oyendo.
But and like tampoco son pendejos. They've been around in
Right.
the world for a long time,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
like, and I think that there's a lot can happen behind closed doors and y entre mujeres, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is also beautiful to, because we all have ideas of what we think and what we think people think, what they tell us our communities believe.
Yes.
But you're pleasantly surprised.
For sure. And I think sometimes they, like, through us, they almost see a mirror of what they couldn't do when they were our age, you know? And so now they're like, you know what?
Run
Vámonos
with it,
con
girl.
todo.
Yeah.
Porque
Yeah.
aquí estamos.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, you were talking about the variety of the Latina diaspora and looking at the data, 108,000 Black Latinas, 75,000 Native Latinas, and this is like, I'm not doing exact numbers because I can't read numbers. 20,500 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Latinas, 1.3 million Latinas who identify as another race, and 1.5 million multiracial Latinas. And so it's super layered,
Yeah, yeah.
this work.
Latinidad is beautiful and fascinating. And like sometimes Latina folks who might not have ties outside of this country may perpetuate a lot of mis and disinformation or not unnuanced, non-nuanced. But it's
Hmm.
just like Panama. You go to Panama, there's just there's all kinds of folks, right? I mean, everywhere, like there's black folks everywhere, and so that's not like. But there's so many AAPI folks that are Panamanian, so many Greek folks that are Panamanian, so many Muslim folks that are Panamanian, so many Jewish folks that are Panamanian, so many different. And I'm just like, sometimes I'm like, I would love to throw in a lot of these folks that don't that see us as so single layer, right?
Yes.
And so many languages, right? Whether they're indigenous to our countries or there are a patois of them, or it's people that have been there for generations and still speak the language of their grandmothers. Like it is so deep, but it's also, speaking of data, it must be so difficult because also like I mean, I think about, I just, we, whether we are blanquitas like me or, not, um, like in my experience as a person who was not racialized in Panama, right? Because en mi Panamá yo soy blanca, right? Y aquí
Claro.
también soy blanca, pero when I moved to this country because I'm Latina, because I speak Spanish, because I'm an immigrant, I'm racialized, and then
Yes.
I like put myself in this like brown category, and then there is something that happens when you migrate to this country as a Latina, and I can only speak to white Latina folks because that is my experience, where we get a little confused, and then for a little bit we perpetuate some stuff. And then we need to get called back in. I've learned a lot and have sat in the discomfort and with I've learned a lot from Black Latina folks. And yeah, there's just a lot. And I think that even what is Latinidad, right? Because I
Right.
love Latinidad. I mean, I didn't identify as Latina till I moved to this country. I've always just been Panameña,
Claro.
right? So then I move here and I'm like, no Panamanians, we're all just Latine. But like even Latinidad, which is so important to me, it's not an identity that resonates with a lot of Black folks because it's so inherently anti-Black, or like it just uplifts people that look like you and I. So Latinidad is fascinating. And I just feel that a lot of us aren't really aware of so many nuances because I mean, sometimes I hear some Latinx folks speak and I was like, you've never like experienced, like you've never left this country. Like you're just repeating
Mm.
what the gringos have told you, you know?
Which I think this is why it's important for us to have this conversation and for dialogue to happen, whether it's publicly or in private, and to be willing to listen, because my Latinidad is not the same as yours, and like having the conversations, and also giving grace. And I often think about when I have, years ago, not so much anymore, but my first Dominicana, it wasn't my first, but a Dominicana that I interviewed, yo pregunté, ¿tú eres afro-latina? And she was like, no, 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 yo soy latina. And so then later, I interviewed another Dominicana, and she was like, well, it's like anti-blackness that has been historically socialized for so long. And so there's also like a lot of grace and compassion for us and each other, and how like race and class and all of the isms have been are also in our history, and we carry them, and we have to unlearn them.
Specifically mestizaje. I mean, I can't
Sí,
speak
claro.
to blackness, right? And I think that there's some conversations that, you know, somebody who the world reads as afro-latina who's struggling with that. Eso no es conmigo, eso es en un
Exacto.
espacio con gente de you wrote, like, just blaquita me no se va a meter ahí, right? Because
Right.
everybody deals with their own process
Totally.
in their own way. Y I'm not imposing anybody what whatever. En eso no me meto, right? But to me, what I find myself talking a lot about with folks who look like me is mestizaje
Mhm.
and how we grow up being told like la raza cósmica, or there's just so much like we're all mixed. And then it took centering, like specifically, I just love Dash Harris, otra panameña, but she's brilliant. She's brilliant, and she talks a lot about mestizaje, and it's hard, and you know you feel sad and shame when you realize all the things that you also bought into some myths and some
Right.
messed up narratives, and you also have a lot of unlearning to do in it. You feel vulnerable, and you feel shame, but like hello, that's life, you know, like that's life. So thinking about mestizaje and like just even yeah just think about mestizaje, and I mean that's internally at Latina Institute. We have a working group that's called Combating Anti-Blackness and Anti-Indigeneity, and it's an internal working group because we are Latina Institute is an organization for and of Latinas. Obviously there are folks that are non-Latine, predominantly folks look like me, right? A lot of the folks look like me, so it's a lot of unlearning and understanding, because we can't go out there claiming to be Latina Institute or doing this work. And again, knowing that reproductive justice is inherently and at its core anti-racist,
Mhm.
and be unaware, you know, of the space we take up, or you know, and like I know that especially with Mexicans, especially with folks who are Chicanos, like la raza, la idea de la raza, and there's it's so deep, it's
So
so
deep.
deep. Okay, you're just like where I'm at is like I get my people, and I'm like everybody get their people, because I can't talk to a Chicano person on their identity, because you know they wouldn't take me seriously, because also I that's on me,
Totally.
you know.
I can't talk to a Chicano person because I'm not. I'm an immigrant.
Right, exactly.
I've had many conversations with Chicanos outside of the podcast, like private conversations, and I'm like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Yo soy mexicana y soy inmigrante, but it's not my story to tell, and I'm happy to facilitate conversations and be in dialogue. I think being in dialogue is so important, and it makes me, as you were talking, it made me think of years ago. I was having a conversation with someone on the show, and porque yo crecí en México, yo crecí con the class, o sea, la lista de castas, and we like had to memorize them, and we were tested on it, and it was like a whole thing.
Wow.
Sí, o sea, it's it goes deep. And y en una conversación yo dije, es que ese dialecto, something, something. And then I got a message from a listener, and they were like, es que it's a language, it's not a dialect. And I was like, you know what? I stand corrected. You are correct. When I was little and I went to school, we were told it was a dialect. So,
Yeah.
but now it's a language. It's a whole language.
And just like the US has its history of like, you know, oppressing and indigenous folks and black folks, and its history and legacy of slavery, of enslaving people and forcing them to labor and ripping apart communities. Like I think the most the deepest work that I also did in work with Dash and oh my goodness, I can't remember her co-facilitator. I'm really sorry. Um, was centering your country's history, because a lot of us, it's just also understanding our history and like learning about the ways in which our individual countries perpetuated so much, and also
Yes.
as even as criollos,
Mm,
which is, like, also elevate and, aspire to whiteness. And so I think rooting and understanding our country's history, particularly, instead of like this big abstract nebulous Latine history, which
right.
so many people could be like, that didn't happen in my country. Oh no, honey, it did. It
Mm-hmm.
did. And you learn about a lot of different things like blancamiento, which, like how they literally incentivized European migration in the 50s. And then I was like, oh my God, my European grandparents, that's when they came to Panama, right? How, and I wish they were around so I could ask them, like, what was, how did, I know they got here by a boat and it wasn't easy. They stopped in Venezuela. They did a whole lot of different things. But I was like, their migration story, like, how, I wonder if there was, how they were incentivized, and obviously just being españoles and europeos in a country like Panama, I'm sure gave them certain advantage. Not that they got here and immediately put on a suit and got a nice job, right? At all. But it is interesting to learn the history of your country.
Super interesting. And also to bring experience, because I often think about indigeneity and how people that look like me, for example, they claim indigeneity. And I grew up in a place where indigenous people are not treated well. And so and I've had conversations with indigenous people from Mexico about this, how there's also this element of, well, how could you claim an identity that you've not experienced if you know it's in your blood? Because then in that case, do I need to then claim my colonizer just as much, you
Yeah.
know?
Dash says, you don't claim, you are claimed.
Mm,
So like, who's claiming you, right? What
right.
tribal, what peoples are claiming you, right? I
Correct.
think there's just a lot of, I think especially in this country, when we come here and we kind of like, we're trying to find our place in our community and trying to make sense of things, we get a little confused.
It's all the identity. It's so deep.
Yeah.
So what's your call to action? How could people get involved? You're in Florida, and we do have listeners in Florida. So tell us all the things.
I guess it depends what your jam is, right? Like, I could be like, I would love for you to come canvas, but it depends on what your jam is. I think first is about, do you have money? Do you have time? Like, what do you like, right? Because there's a need. Is social media your thing? Um, are you good with administrative systems? And you want to, so it depends on what you want to do, right? I think if you're in Florida, um, find yourself a political home, find yourself an org, right? I think the most important thing in these times is to be super informed, right? Like, know your rights, even regardless of your immigration status. Know your rights and make sure that other people around you know their rights and that you are a safe space, a safe haven, like for folks who aren't safe, right? I think know your abortion funds. Florida has 6 abortion funds. Donate to the abortion funds. Uh, because navigating these systems is so complicated, right? So like, um, we do trainings, for example, on, especially specifically in Panama, in Spanish, sorry, cómo hablar del aborto en español, right? To give people the
Mm.
tools to have these conversations with their family, right? So like, it really just depends on what your jam is. If you're like, I'm just giving away my money, great. We got that too, right? If you're like, I have time and I have this skill set, or I have time and I'm willing to do this, or I think it's just really plug in. So what's the call to action? Like, if you really want to plug in, like, I mean, there's just so many different orgs doing great work and so many different ways to plug in. I know this is very general. I feel like I didn't adequately answer that question, but you can share my information if anybody has specific questions, and it also depends because there's so many issues, LGBTQ issues, uh, repro rights, health and justice issues, immigration, healthcare, Medicaid expansion, like, voting rights, citizen initiatives are under attack in Florida, and you know,
Yeah. Well, and I think of your story of how you started finding a group. Let's
right,
just find community first, and
right,
then maybe figure out what touches your heart the most, because there's enough causes for people to, you
yeah.
know, get involved with. Okay, tell us all the places and spaces where we can find you, where we can find Latina Reproductive Justice, National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice,
Yes.
all the
Okay.
things.
All right. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. You can find me on Instagram, Charito PTY. And honestly, you could just Google Latina Institute, Florida, New York, Texas, Virginia, DC. We're in 4 states, and we also have a DC team that does national work. So if you're in any of these states and you want to plug in, or you just want to stay updated with, with what's going on and the news specifically through our perspective, definitely tap in there. And you
Yay.
can always, yeah, Charito PTY and a la orden.
Amazing. Last few questions. Do you have a remedio you want to share with us? Hmm.
I saw that and I was like, this is hilarious because I was like, what is un remedio? Especially when you said no Vicks Vaporub, because my grandma
That was the
swore
first
by
thing.
Vicks. I mean, that's the first thing that came to mind. Like that lady would put it on her chest, in the right here under her nose, even in the soles of her
Bottom of
feet
your
with
feet.
socks
Yes.
on. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think everyone was born in Latin America con un VIX.
Why? Yeah, Vicks Vaporub. It's just
That's why I say
fascinating.
it down.
You
That's
know?
been said way too many times, and every
Yeah.
time people are like, "Man, that's the one that I was gonna say." And I'm like, "I know. That's why we
So
don't."
I think about like what remedio. I think about my grandma who's now passed, La Bendición.
La
I
bendición
think
es muy
like that's just,
buena.
yeah. So then I'm not gonna lie, I called my mom and I was like, Mommy, qué remedio? And immediately she was like, Arnica y rubarbo y soda. And I'm like, okay,
Oh,
mama. She's like, Arnica for the bruising and the bleeding y rubarbo y soda para el dolor de barriga.
ooh, that's a new one. Nice.
So there you have it. Arnica for bruising and bleeding, and rubarbo y soda to drink with a little bit of water when you have stomachache.
Okay. Y el árnica, es que el árnica tiene muchas aplicaciones, ¿no? Like on a
Yeah,
tea, you can put an alcohol.
como una pomadita. But she said que la abuela también le daba una cucharadita con agua. And I'm like, is that safe, Mom? Like, what's in there? And I was like, before I say this out loud, I should check if it's safe.
Right. Like we're not poisoning each other.
But she's good. I mean, she's good. Our family, yeah, my family's lived a long time. They're good.
All the árnica. And do you have a quote or mantra that you live by right now?
I don't particularly have a quote or mantra. I think that when I saw this question, I was like, mi mamá tiene un dicho for everything, everything. So much that like I compile her dichos. Her
Nice.
dichos, my grandma's dicho, my dad's side, everybody tiene un dicho para todo. And I feel like whenever I need them, I feel like they just come to me and I feel like they're little nuggets of like ancestral wisdom.
Yes.
So like, if I'm having a bad day and I'm frustrated, I can hear my mom saying like, quería ser reina, aprenda a tirar besitos. You know, if I'm like advocating and thinking about advocating for myself, I hear my mom saying like, el que no llora no mama, right? I find myself like when I'm like deeply like conflicted or need something, or like my mom says, en boca cerrada no entran moscas.
That's a classic. That's a classic.
Right. I feel like it's not an affirmation, but it's just like these little nuggets of ancestral wisdom that I feel like so grateful. I feel like is a legacy that my family has left me. And it's so beautiful
It
because they're
is.
also so funny.
Mm-hmm.
They're so funny, the sayings,
Yes.
like my dad loves saying, entre más conozco a la gente, más quiero a mi perro. He doesn't even have a dog, like they're just so deep and so beautiful. And like, I think it's also a testament to like, things are complicated and then finding that comic relief
Mm-hmm. It's very
in
Latino.
everything.
That,
Yeah.
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 Coping with
Yeah.
humor.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amigos en México, una niña en México siempre dice, mis traumas, mis chistes, ¿ok?
that's that's a good one.
That's a good one. And I'm like, you know what? I mean, self-deprecating never like killed anyone,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
why
Yeah.
not laugh
Yeah.
through it?
Yeah.
And do you have a productivity tip, trick, or tool that you want to share with us?
So I think this question was specifically challenging because I'm shifting away from productivity. Not that I don't want to be productive
Ooh,
or produce, but I just realized like I'm somebody who works hard and works fast, and like the good immigrant, right? Like the
Yes.
good first daughter, the good so many
Yes.
things.
Yes.
And it took me a while to realize that people who work effectively and efficiently get rewarded with more work.
Mm.
And as I enter my 40s, I just, there were a lot of things like with this coffee allergy that didn't turn out to be a coffee allergy, and like these gastro issues and just things. And you're just like, and you go to, I was like 38 and I'd had two colonoscopies because I was trying to figure out what was wrong with my body. And they're like, nothing is wrong with you. And then the more it was just like, it was stress.
Wow.
And last year, in the past 9 months, my dad has had a stroke in the brain, a heart attack,
Oof.
and he had a surgery for a high risk aneurysm in the past 9 months. And that man is walking, talking, counting, y jodiendo. Like that, he's good. It's literally a miracle. And what I think I learned from all that was like, I wasn't put on this world to produce. Obviously, I respect my job and I feel blessed to have it and so lucky. And I will do what I need to do, but I cannot pour from an empty cup,
Hmm.
and I will not be a martyr. So I almost like reject that question because I'm like, I am working on drawing boundaries and I am enough.
Well, that could
And
be
yeah,
the tip,
I will
trick,
do
or
my
tool.
work plan. Yeah. Yeah, I will do my work plan. I will do great work. And I am not being defined by all of that.
I mean, I think a great tip is to rest.
Yeah. And find joy
Mm-hmm. For sure. For sure.
and be vulnerable.
Yeah, totally. And on that note, how are you taking a restorative pause today?
So today, so it's a long weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and because my wife doesn't really get those a lot because she works for the county, she's a public servant. We decided to like make a nice long weekend del amor y la amistad.
Ay,
So
claro.
yeah, so we're doing dinner, we're going to the beach, we're gonna go, we're gonna go to an Everglades cleanup. We're gonna live like we live here, right? We live where people vacation, and and I think today I've been working on getting more sleep. I think, yeah, I think after this, I'm done for the day and I'm just going to get home and spend time with my doggy. I've been walking, I've been doing Pilates. Girl, the past 9 months, year have been life changing. And I
Mm,
think my restore is like really just to ground myself in what I've been really intentional about doing, which is rest and joy and recovery, and like not letting all of this define me, and really taking a break from the news, the
mm-hmm.
media, the doom scrolling, the
Mm. It's a great way to resist,
yeah, yeah.
for sure. I support that. Thank you so much, Charo, for being here at Café con Pam. Thank you for your
Thank
work
you very much.
and all you
Thank
do.
you for your work.
Yeah, inspiring us to take action. There's so many ways to be an activist, you know?
Absolutely. That's just being visible
Yes.
is being visible and unapologetic if you feel safe, because not everybody has the luxury of safety, right?
Correct. Correct. For a long time, I hid behind my guest stories because I wasn't safe. So I was like, okay, I have the ovaries to ask questions, but I'm not going to share about me.
But how cool that you could elevate other people's stories who were unapologetic, and in that, like, just
Yes.
elevate those stories and give people, like, it wasn't you necessarily sharing your story, but you gave people the space to, and in doing so you elevated stories that allowed other folks to. Yeah, that's really
Totally.
cool. Todo el mundo, cada uno a su ritmo, ¿no? Cada uno a su
Exacto.
ritmo.
Y
Yeah.
cada uno tiene un sabor que escoge y
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
corre con ese. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam.
Bueno, listeners, that was my conversation with Charo. I hope you enjoyed it. If this podcast has ever inspired you, here are some ways to support us so we can keep going for many, many more episodes. There are some free ways, like leaving a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app. Of course, you can subscribe on YouTube. And subscribing on YouTube is subscribing, ringing the bell, leaving a comment, sharing the video. Sharing this episode with someone you love is really important and it helps us a ton. Free. You don't have to spend any money. Now, if you're like, all right, I have some coins to drop on you because Indie Podcast, we do need that support. We have the Supporters Club. The Supporters Club, you get exclusive content, is an easy way. One cup of coffee, $5 a month, one cup of coffee a month. You do have to go through our host, our podcast host, and create an account and all the things. But once you set it up, you set it up and it's done. You can also, if you're interested in working with me, you can enroll in Gather Circle. This is my annual program to help you break free from silence and reclaim your power. And you can also hire me to speak at your organization, at your company, at your school. And let's bring conversations like these to even more people. Let's dismantle the damages of Kaideta culture. Bueno, of course, let's stay connected on all the socials. Tag us, screenshot tag us, tell us all the things at Cafe Con Pan Podcast on all the places and spaces. Thank you so much for listening. Nos vemos pronto y sigue brillando.
Sabrosura pa' ti que